This is Matthew with Another World Terraria. In this video, I'm going to tell you all about which lights that I use and how I use them to grow all my plants, including ferns, orchids, aquatics, carnivores, moss, and more. I've decided to simplify the topic by grouping the lights I use into three major categories. A summary of the top 3 types of lights I use are as follows. Please note that I will provide more information and tips later in the video. Of the 3 types of lights, the one that I have the fewest of is the Sunblaster LED bar. I use these when I need relatively bright light, which is only the case in a small percentage of my plant collection. The next most used type of light is the E26 Screwin LED bulb, such as Jungle Dawn LED, NE Herp Value Grow LED, and so on. I typically use these to light glass tanks, such as a 20-gallon long grow tank. The light that I use across the largest percentage of my plant collection is, believe it or not, cheap LED bars, which are generally used under cabinets in kitchens. This often comes as a surprise to people who have been misled to believe that you need special type of lights that are made for growing plants. That's simply not the case. I use these to light most of my wire racks with bioactive grow bins, which comprise about 70% of my entire collection, and I have great success with them. You may have noticed that all of the lights I use are LED, which stands for light emitting diode. Compared to the other type of light bulbs such as incandescent or fluorescent, LED lights have the following benefits. Low power consumption, very long lasting, come in many shapes, sizes, and luminosities, often run at cooler temperatures, but it depends on the design, and are not susceptible to breakage like glass bulbs are. Some LEDs can be relatively expensive, however that's offset by the fact that they consume less power and last a longer time than traditional glass bulbs. A quick note on color temperature, also known as Kelvin rating. I prefer lights with a color temperature of around 6,000 Kelvin. This approximates natural light, looks pleasing, and will result in balanced and healthy growth. You can use higher or lower Kelvin ratings, but at the extremes they may affect the growth negatively and will not look natural. Speaking of light appearance, I only use white lights. I don't use the type of grow lights which are visibly skewed toward red, pink, purple, blue, and so on. Personally, I find them unattractive and they are not necessary for the purposes of growing terrarium plants. Now let's go over the pros and cons of each of the 3 major categories of lights that I mentioned earlier. Let's start with the Sunblaster LEDs. Pro: they're quite bright, which is good for plants that need a lot of light. Pro: they come in long sizes, which are good for lighting the entire length of a rack, shelf, or table. Pro: they're easy to mount and have good mounting options. Pro: they have standard power plug ends that fit well into power strips. Con: they are somewhat expensive. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of the screw-in light bulbs like the Jungle Dawn LED. Pro: some can be quite bright, which is useful for plants that like a lot of light. Pro: they have efficient light output due to only having downward-facing diodes. Con: the higher quality ones, such as the Jungle Dawn brand, are relatively expensive. Con: they can run quite hot. Con: they require some type of light hood or mountable socket. I have been using Exoterra hoods for most of my glass tanks. Speaking of the bulbs running hot and using Exoterra hoods, here's a quick pro tip for you. Remove the metal reflectors from the hoods. They're not needed because the bulbs only have downward facing light, and leaving them in traps and reflects the heat back to the bulb. By removing the reflectors, you clear a path for the bulb heat to escape out of the hood vents on the top. And now let's talk about the pros and cons for cabinet lights. Pro: they're affordable. Pro: they are very cool running. Pro: they are modular and customizable. Pro: they're very thin and low profile. Pro: you can chain several or more together on the same power plug. Pro: they use an extremely small amount of power. Pro: they're easy to install on wire racks with zip ties and only slightly more challenging to install under wood shelves. Pro: they have a good brightness level that is appropriate for most of the plants that I grow. Con: the power adapters on the plugs tend to be larger and take up more space on power strips. Con. When I'm chaining multiple lights together in various configurations, it seems like I always run out of the connector cables that come in the kits, so I have to get creative with the interlocking connectors and or buy more LED kits to get more connector cables. Con. They may produce yellowish bands of light at the fringes of the light output, but this doesn't bother me because I'm not lighting display tanks with them. Now I'm going to share some specifics about each of these type of lights and how I use them. Let's start off with the Sun Blaster LEDs. I use one Sun Blaster per shelf on a wire rack, and currently I only use the 24-inch length. The distance of the light from the plants varies from about 5 inches to 8 inches away. I put them closer for carnivorous plants like Drosera that look best with very bright light, and then further away when I want more light spread at a lower luminosity to light more plants that don't need bright light. Now let's talk about the E26 Screwin LEDs such as the Jungle Dawn. I usually only use these over glass aquariums and tanks. Jungle Dawn has a 9 watt, 11 watt, and 13 watt models. The quantity of the bulbs depends on which wattage and therefore which brightness of bulb, and also on tank size, distance, and type of plants. Generally, I use about 1 to 2 bulbs for every 10 gallons of an aquarium, so 3 to 4 bulbs for a 20-gallon long tank. The distance varies per type of plant being grown and how many bulbs are in the hood. Generally, I have them about 5 inches to 12 inches away from the plants. Sometimes I'll put layers of black fiberglass window screen mesh over the tank lids to reduce the brightness if it's not practical to raise the hood higher or remove any bulbs. Now let's talk about cabinet lights. For most of my plants, I use one LED bar per bioactive grow bin. Sometimes 2 bars for larger bins, and even more bars for plants that want brighter light or for lighting an entire space under a shelf which will have multiple small terrariums or other containers underneath. The distance from the plants varies a lot, usually from 3 inches all the way up to 15 inches away from the plants. 3 inches obviously for bright light plants like carnivorous and aquatic plants, and 15 inches for dim light plants like Bucephalandra and some forest plants. You might be wondering about how long to leave the lights on. Currently, I use a photo period of approximately 14 hours per day, and I set that up using a digital timer such as a Hydro Farm or Century 7-day timer.